with Talat-Farooq Awan
on BBC Radio Manchester and BBC Radio Lancashire.
It's 7:21 now to meet the author Indus, of course. Now, a new children's book is unveiling a character grappling with issues of identity and her place in a new school thousands of miles from home. The Girl Who Slept Under the Moon is the first in a new collection of books by British Palestinian writer Shereen Malherbe, following the story of Noor as she struggles to find her place in a different country. Focusing on experiences that all cultures can relate to, Noor takes comfort in the things that remain the same. But luckily, Noor is not alone. Another girl also can't find her place in the playground. Well, I'm pleased to say Shereen joins me on the line now. Good evening.
Hi, thanks for having me.
How are you? You're right.
Yes, I'm good, thank you.
So, The Girl Who Slept Under the Moon. I've had a little read. I read it with my daughter, and whose middle name's Noor. So she was looking at me thinking, but my story's not quite like this. But when you're trying to explain, well, she's a 4-year-old. So in terms of identity, I think she's still slowly learning about who she really is. But tell us about how the idea for this book came about.
Well, it was a few reasons. I've actually spent 10 years living in the Middle East with my 4 young children, and they had a predominantly Middle Eastern experience. And a couple of years ago, we relocated back to the UK. And when I was researching, we're looking where we are in times of unprecedented movement. So more children are finding themselves away from home. So what I wanted to do with this sort of with children moving across the world, both through displacement as well as travel, the global landscape is shifting. I think when I last researched it, UNICEF reported that as of 2018, an estimated 17 million of whom were children were internally displaced.
Wow.
So one of the main problems that children have is their adjustment into a new society while struggling to hold on to their belonging and identity. So what I wanted to create is a celebration of the beauty of diversity and highlight that a different background, a different belonging and identity can be enjoyed and shared through the art of storytelling. And that's really where the idea came from.
Well, it's a lovely little story about someone who wants to settle herself in school but feels she's the odd one out and clearly misses her home and her life there back home and the things that she could just simply, which you take for granted when you're at home and you're relaxed. And one of them is, being able to pray wherever you feel you're able to. And that was one of her little struggles, wasn't it, really, for her to do her namaz, her salah 5 times a day, as Muslims pray 5 times a day, but she couldn't find a place to pray.
Yes. So the idea of the prayer is not so much the requirement to pray, because obviously this is a book aimed at primary school children. It's more about the fact that prayer in an Islamic household is a pinnacle of the home in many, many homes. And it's also a part of the schooling experience where you can, do your prayers whilst you're at school. And I think even for my children, one of the biggest things is that sort of shift. And with Noor, praying from when she was young, she would pray with her family at home, and then she's moved away from this landscape and everything is different. So for her, holding on to her prayer is as important to her as holding on to other aspects of her culture. And I think because that's not really explored very much in narratives for children's literature, and I wanted to really open this space up to say, break down the barriers. This is, part of their identity and part of their home life from a young age, and just understanding that and giving her that space to pray and then to also share with people that it's because it reminds her of who she is as a person. It's actually like a fundamental foundation to her belonging and her belief. And by doing it in a way where other children in a setting that might not necessarily know. So a child moving from the Middle East to the West, the children there might not really know, whoa, what is she doing and what is the prayer about? This sort of broaches it on a subject that breaks down those barriers, that says, this is how I identify with my culture, and it's really important for me to do it. And in finding that space, that escape, she also finds another child who also doesn't find her place on the playground. So I think we can all say that we've been in situations where we feel like the odd one out.
Well, it's this is strange because my little story also relates to Noor, believe it or not, because back in the day, I couldn't find anywhere to pray either at a workplace, and I used the boiler room. So that used to be my secret room, and I would quietly go in there, not telling anyone.
No.
And they'd often say, well, where does he disappear to at certain times? And then until someone outed me saying, oh, because he has to go and pray.
Yeah,
and
well,
said,
actually,
is that what you've been doing in the boiler room all that time? I said, well, there was no place to pray. But then afterwards, they then, found a room for me and then made it, a prayer room as such, a place for meditation for others too. So we've all been through that.
Rooms. Yeah, I mean, the actual, the way that I got her through to a storage cupboard is because my brother also had that same problem. And if you look at the dedication at the front, it will say, because my brother who shared his story, which inspired mine.
Yes, yes, I did read that, and I'm thinking, I wonder what the story was. Well, there you go.
he did pray in the stationery cupboard at a company where he was working, and actually Layla Abu Layla, one of my favourite authors, has reviewed the book for us, and she said, I felt like this book was meant for me, and other adults who are reading it to their children are saying, oh, I feel the same. I've also struggled to pray.
Well, in this day and age, it's as surprising it happens, but that's our story. I mean, the places I've read my prayers over the years is, some bizarre places, I'll tell you that. But and what's interesting, her other friend who happens to have ginger hair, so she found herself different, as lots of people probably may agree or disagree. But then she found a solution and welcomed her in such a way. We won't give that away because I think people need to get the book to see how she helped Noor settle in the school and make her feel part of the school. But apart from that, did you model Noor on anyone in particular?
No, I don't think so. I think it was just the experience I have from when we left the Middle East. I was thinking, what aspects of it would I like my children to take with them? And naturally, being a storyteller, I wanted to incorporate that and take with them those elements, and that's why I wanted the idea of stories within a story. So when the characters are in the cupboard, they're actually escaping where they currently are, and they're travelling across this landscape to Noor's home. So it gives you that true storytelling experience of escaping your current scenario and being able to travel cross borders and understand each other through the medium of storytelling.
Yeah. Now, what's interesting is this is your first book, The Tower, is a complete contrast to the book that you've written here. So tell us a little about The Tower as well, because this is based on Grenfell Tower, isn't it?
Yes. Well, my first book was Jasmine Falling, and then The Tower was my novel that was out in 2019, and it was loosely based on Grenfell. Now, The Tower is for grown-ups, so the themes that can be explored there are darker than what you'd find in a children's book. However, all three of my books focus on authentic representation and also on giving voices who may not be everywhere in literature or even the media, some representation and some authentic representation. So there are actually similar themes that run through all three of my books about belonging and identity, and this sort of authentic representation of certain lifestyles, movements. I mean, all books straddle both the Middle East and the UK. So there are tie-ins, but The Tower is, because it's for a more grown-up audience, I was inspired to write it after the awful disaster, and seeing the displacement of so many people, and some of them did end up far from home again and in the tower. And it's this situation where we have in society, in tower blocks, this unusual combination of people who would never usually meet that come together in these environments. And the tower especially, how two women from very different backgrounds, Reem is from Syria and Leah is British, and how they help each other through the time that they experience together, despite having very different backgrounds and strengths.
Yeah, well, it's a story certainly that has a lot of meaning, and no doubt will resound with a lot of people who've been through a similar situation. How did you get into writing then, Shereen?
Well, when I used to work for the bank, and when I was young, and I left to go travelling with my husband, and we went to my heritage homeland of Palestine. And as we were walking through the streets, we saw a tourist bus pull up, and it had all blacked out windows, and then the tourist came off the bus surrounded by security, took a photo of a tree that was where Jesus was supposed to have slept under, and then they all piled back on the bus and drove off. And at the time we were walking around the streets, and my family lives there, and I've never really felt safer. And I just realised at that point that people aren't seeing the real Palestine. And that inspired me to collect my family's stories for the months that we stayed there, and to put them into a fictional novel called Jasmine Falling. And it was really this perspective that we had coming from the UK, but being able to live with my family in the West Bank, and to be able to capture things that you never really read about Palestine or see. I mean, you can get lots of non-fiction books on the Israeli Palestinians. You can get different perspectives if you're looking for sort of essays and history, but you don't usually get the on the ground stories that are shared in families. And because we captured so many of them literally in notebooks translated from Arabic to English, and I just had so much content that I thought I need to tell people about this. And that's what
and of course you have the real insight
into
the community, don't you? So
yes, well, I mean, my family is so well known in Ariha, which is the Arabic name for Jericho, that we got lost once, and we said, oh, where's the Zaghari family? And they literally could tell us where, because they'd lived there in the same house for generations. So, you don't have that type of access if you're a tourist. We stayed with them for months and travelled around the West Bank, and everything that was coming out, I just thought this is an amazing experience to have, and I really need to tell people about it. And the other side of it was my children were very young, and we don't get to travel to Palestine a lot. And I wondered, what exactly will my children see when they go back there? Because the history is being eroded at such an incredible pace because of the occupation that, I don't know what Palestine they'll see. So I wanted to capture it at that moment so that it was sort of captured as we saw it, because with these types of societies that, when people die, I remember one of my aunties died just before I published the novel, and with her death, the stories disappear, and I just really didn't want that to happen.
And that's the tragic thing, isn't it? Lots of these old stories, and including, stories from my own family. Once the elders have passed away, that's it, they're lost. So this is the time to capture those stories, cherish them in whichever form you find best, and in for you, it's writing. And so thank you very much for sharing your story, Shereen. Really do appreciate that.
Thank you for having
me.
Thank
you for taking time out to speak to us. So thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's Shereen Malherbe there, and The Girl Who Slept Under the Moon is available now on Beacon Books. So do catch it. It's a lovely little story, and it'll delight your little ones too.
BBC Radio Manchester and BBC Radio Lancashire.